Hey friend, welcome to Authentic Performance, the podcast. My name is Nat and I'm your host. At Authentic Performance, our mission is to provide education and advocacy for all athletes, developing awareness surrounding identity, purpose, and health, so athletes can live well beyond their sport. This week's guest is Jonathan Curran. Jonathan is a graduate student on the St. Mary's College of California men's golf team. He is heavily involved on his campus as co-president for the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, West Coast Conference SAAC representative, and creator of the first ever Student Athlete Leadership Development Program at St. Mary's. He also hosts a podcast of his own called Stories by Student Athletes, which provides a platform for athletes to be vulnerable and share their experiences. We got to talk about all things mental health and what it looks like to advocate for the student-athlete experience, providing life skills for post-sport pursuits and building strong relationships in and out of the athletic community. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jonathan. All right. Thank you so much for being here, Jonathan. So excited to hear more about your story and just all you have to share. So just to kick things off, we would love to hear a little bit about you, whatever you feel like you want to share.
Yeah, first off, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate opportunity to kind of share my story and to be vulnerable. So thank you, first off. My name's Jonathan Curran. I am a redshirt senior, so fifth year at St. Mary's College of California. I'm a golfer and yeah, originally from Scottsdale, Arizona. This is my fifth year up here, as I mentioned, and it's been different, but I've loved every second of it, and journey's been really awesome.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, it's cool because I'm in Phoenix, Arizona now, but I grew up in California, so just switch spots.
Yeah,
Um, so one of the main things I think that is really cool about you, I mean, obviously, like you have experience playing a sport, but you also started a podcast called Stories by Student Athletes. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and kind of the heart behind starting it?
yeah. One of the things that I'm really huge on is finding ways to give back to the community. I'm a man of faith, so service is really important to me. And one of the ways that I kind of found last year in my the spring semester of my senior year as an undergrad was an opportunity to connect with other student athletes or just other people my age. And one thing that doesn't really get talked about a lot, and one thing that we'll talk about a lot, thankfully, in the college athletics space is mental health. And I was really kind of going through a bit of a tough time personally, and I knew that my story would be able to relate to someone else's. And when I was looking around, I really didn't find any student athlete led platforms or organizations or any type of resources that can help that were from people my age as well. And the, it's a funny story because the idea for a podcast wasn't actually my own. It was someone who was super close to me, and we were talking about my experiences, possible ways to give back. And he's like, "Hey, man, like you could start a podcast or something like that." And it kind of took me by storm. And it's so funny because literally like that night or the next day, I went to Target, bought a whiteboard, like put a whiteboard up in my room, started whiteboarding the whole idea out, and it just kind of transformed from there. So I'm super grateful for the people that I've been able to meet from it and for conversations like these that we're able to have now. And that's really how Stories by Student Athletes started.
Awesome. Yeah. I think it's just cool, and obviously like from a faith standpoint too, like testimonies are a really great way to like share your story and how like God has worked in your life, but that just shows kind of how stories can impact people. So what kind of do you see as like the value of sharing stories? Like obviously your platform is kind of to give that opportunity to other athletes. So what is kind of the value of the storytelling?
Yeah, the value of the storytelling, in my opinion, is that a person gets to share how they see themselves to other people and not be conformed to the image that other people may just see from first glance. Right? A lot of the times, uh, we can see other student athletes on other teams and just relate to them by associating a face in a team. Like that could be so and so from this team, and you never really get to know anything about them. And it's like team stereotypes and sports stereotypes like are true. Like they're real and they happen, unfortunately. And um, really trying to kind of destigmatize that in a way, get to know an individual and hear their story for their sake and how they want to put themselves out there is really kind of the value of storytelling in my mind. And um, how you mentioned testimonies right off the bat when it comes to our faith journey. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is like, what good is a testimony if you have no one to testify with or no one to testify for? And that's a really kind of a huge part of my life, and especially the podcast itself, because it gives us the platform to do that in a safe space.
Yeah. And I think in athletics too, like sometimes a lot of the things that talk about, especially like mental health, can be such an uncomfortable conversation. I mean, I just even think of like growing up, my younger brother plays football, and like in the locker room, like that's not a place where most athletes would feel comfortable saying like, hey, I'm really struggling with this today. Like it's just not that environment typically. So I think it's really cool that you kind of open up that door to be able to have those conversations and just be vulnerable, because like you said, like that's how we connect with people, hearing their story and understanding who they truly are. I want to hear a little bit about some of the leadership roles that you've stepped into at St. Mary's, and just how that's kind of impacted you, kind of getting to go outside of your sport and be involved in a little different way, still in athletics, but maybe not directly. What does that look like?
Yeah, I'm super blessed to be really involved on my campus and really in our conference and nationally as well. I think for me, the most easy way to put myself as a leader is as a senior on my team. I've been voted kind of as a co-captain on my team, which I'm grateful for that kind of honor, and that's how I kind of lead my team specifically. But then um, as our athletic department, we have our Student Athlete Advisory Council, SAAC. I've been co-president for, I think this is my second or third year full term now. So, been very involved with that, kind of getting our SAC group up and running and now kind of established, getting more into the community there. And that leadership opportunity has really opened the door for me to go more on a national level. I think that I represent St. Mary's along with my other co-president as our West Coast Conference SAC reps. So the two of us have a leading voice at a conference level, and I've been blessed to represent St. Mary's student athletes at our conference executive council meetings in front of athletic directors, senior women's administrators, our conference commissioner, things along those lines, which have all been great experiences. And then this past summer, I also represented St. Mary's at the NCAA Career and Sports Forum, which is a really cool opportunity where I think there were over 200 student athletes from across the country. We all were able to spend a weekend in Indianapolis together and at NCAA headquarters and really kind of grow in our understanding of college athletics, but also a career in sports possibly, and see where that could lead us if playing professionally doesn't turn out or anything along those lines. But um, I've been very blessed the last few years to step into a big leadership role, which comes with a lot of responsibility at times, but I'm also very grateful for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that you mentioned that you've done some like student athlete leadership development stuff too. What does that kind of look like? How has that been part of that like giving back as well?
Yeah, that thank you for bringing that back up. I forgot to mention it because this past year I started a program at St. Mary's called Gale Lead. Our mascot is we're called the Gales, which is like an Irish warrior, I think an old time Irish warrior along those lines. So that's where the name comes from. But When I was at that Career in Sports Forum over the summer, I noticed that a lot of these Power Five schools, um, they had these leadership development programs for all their student athletes. And typically that comes with a lot of funding and professional resources, people who are hired specifically for leadership development in these roles. And uh, at St. Mary's, a respectable athletic school in D1, but maybe not at the same size as some of these Power Five schools. We necessarily didn't have the funding for anything like that. But I really felt called to bring leadership development back here because we're still student athletes. We should get that same type of experience and that development as part of our student athlete journey. So I really helped create this program called Gale Lead. It's kind of its first of its kind leadership development program here at St. Mary's, but one of the really cool aspects of it is that it's entirely student athlete run. So, to my knowledge, there's not many programs, if any, who do that around the country, and um, it's been awesome. We've met twice this year already, kind of identifying who we are as individuals, kind of looking within to be able to identify beliefs and values and transferable skills, and to be able to articulate those to a group of people. But we've had roughly 70 student athletes voluntarily show up. And that's something that's super cool and a way for myself, but all of us to impact the lives of those around us. So that's a really recent leadership activity that I've been blessed with for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just to also get involved with something outside of just directly being like in your sport, I think is cool. And to have student athletes running it too, because like ultimately you can have people that have played or have some experience, but when you're in the middle of it, it's a little different to get to walk alongside other athletes. I'm curious to know, like, with all of the leadership experiences that you've had, like, how is that impacted your time as an athlete and also just your time as like a college student and that experience?
Yeah, it's been the best experience possible for sure. I think for me, my freshman year was when COVID happened. So it started off different, to say the least. My sophomore year, no one was on campus. I lived off campus, and really only athletes were around school. And junior year kind of got back to a little bit of normal, but really hasn't felt normal until this past calendar year. Um, so getting involved with leadership activities on campus, in our conference, around the country has really helped confirm my sense of purpose, I guess I would say. It's given me something more than just being an athlete or more than just playing my sport to look forward to. And it's something that is absolutely essential for all of us as athletes and as people, not to limit the gifts that God's given us just to a sport or just to a performance, anything along those lines. So the leadership activities and roles, they've sometimes been a little overwhelming for sure because you get so engulfed in it and you want to make sure that you're keeping the big picture in mind. But I've also learned so much from the process and the person that I am now, how I carry myself and how I live my life as a result of some of these experiences and opportunities is exactly who I've always wanted to be. So I'm
Yeah.
super grateful for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's cool too to see how some of those opportunities then translate into, later in life and like developing those skills not only for yourself but also like getting to lead other people, I think is really awesome. I do want to touch a little bit about community, because I know like obviously you're in these leadership roles and you do have opportunities to serve others. But what do you think, especially as a student athlete, like the importance of building community, whether that be in your sport or in like athletic programs or outside of that? Why is that important?
Yeah, it's everything. Community really speaks to the culture of everything that goes around, and culture, the people who you're around kind of dictate where you go in life. Not even to go broader than just sports. The people that you're around, I mean, the values, the work ethics, all of those desirable values and skills, like you have to be around that kind of stuff, and you can't do it alone. You really can't. Like, trust me, I've tried, and first off, it's not worth it because even if you do achieve the goal, if you have no one to celebrate with, it's a fleeting feeling, first off. But getting into the community and working for those around you, first off, gives you endless motivation. You'll always have a reason to keep going and a reason to kind of identify your why, but helps you stay grateful as well. It just totally gets you out of yourself and keeps things in perspective. And in my mind, perspective is one of the or the most single important aspect in how we go about our life. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and it's cool too that you create a community by talking about things as well, like with your podcast. Like people come together over things like that, even if you're not playing the same sport at the same school. Like any kind of shared experiences help build that community, which I think is really cool. And that's one of the reasons why I think your podcast is just such a blessing. So, what are some ways that athletes can support one another through those shared experiences? Like maybe they're hearing someone's story and they really resonate with it. How can there be this support system based on those experiences that they both shared?
first off, the easiest way to do it is just let them know. Reach out to them. It can be a simple direct message on social media. I mean, it's so easy to connect with people nowadays that all it takes is a note, right? Hey, I heard your story on this podcast, or I really appreciated your Instagram post or your Twitter post, and it really resonated with me, and I benefited from it. Messages like those mean the world, and they really bring out that sense of community because you know that other people are there for you, even if you haven't even met them. More so, bringing off like going off of that point and letting people know, showing up as well is huge. And the easiest way to do that as student athletes could just simply be going to someone else's sporting event, like going to a soccer game, going to a volleyball match, things along those lines where you're going to support your friends, not because they're on a team, but because they're your friend and you know them on a deeper level than just their athletic performance, but you know them for the person that they are, that outside the classroom, outside the court. And those are the type of connections that last a lifetime. Right? You're not going to remember so and so had this many kills and made this many shots and won MVP of the league or whatever, but you are going to remember that they came to your senior night and made you feel super special by bringing you flowers or something along those lines. And those type of connections are incredibly unique and special in athletics because our athletic department and our sport provide that common area of community right off the bat. And there are, at my school, 300 other student athletes who are on campus every single day and are willing to show up. And all you have to do is look. So that's that's how community really can shape the student athlete experience in my mind.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool that you automatically have people that are experiencing similar things. It may not be
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same thing, but even just like your teammates, like I think of my freshman year of college was 2020. So right after COVID had started, we went on campus, but we were not able to play for months and ended the year with 5 people on my college basketball team. And like that was the hardest experience I had ever gone through. But those other girls had also gone through the exact same experience. And so it was so special to get to share that with someone. And we could bounce off of each other, I things that were going on in our lives and struggles and frustration, all of those things, but it's because of that shared experience and getting to do that together that even became a topic of conversation. But like you're saying, like that community can be built in so many different ways, whether it be the people on your team, the people at your school, maybe even just some kind of mental health battle that
Mm-hmm.
someone else is facing and is sharing. Like those kind of things really matter. Which again, like I just think it's so great that you're encouraging people to share it too, and build that community, because I think naturally it's going to just continue to grow. I
Totally.
want to
I want
go for it.
to point out one of your things or one of your comments, the mental health battles everyone relates to. That's been one of my biggest takeaways from the past year, to be honest with you. And it's not necessarily that each person goes through different events, because we do, but it's how we relate to those events, the feelings, the emotions associated with them, right? You may not understand the event that made me angry because it could be specific to me, but you can relate to the feeling of being angry or being pissed off that it didn't go through. And like a specific event in your mind will come up and when that happened to you. And we can use those feelings and emotions to relate to one another. And that's how that sense of community gets built. And that's how we grow closer to one another. And that's something unique to us as human beings, right? It's not sports, it's not faith, it's not any type of factor. It's our shared experience as human beings and the life that God's blessed us with. So that's just what I
Yeah.
wanted to add on to your point.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I want to move into a little bit of that identity piece, because like we've talked about, these shared experiences and what makes, humans special, like these connections. But I think identity is another really important topic when it comes to mental health, and ultimately, like as an athlete, figuring out who you are. So I want to talk about why it's important to develop an identity as more than athletes. So, like at Authentic Performance, one of the main pillars that we like talk about is identity, and developing that so that you can be, not just an athlete, but also thriving beyond your sport. So, why is it important to have this idea of someone as an athlete, but also that more than just an athlete perspective?
It's essential because you're not going to play a sport for your entire life, but you will be yourself for your entire life. So why would you put your identity in something that's going to stop when you're still going to have to live, right? And that's one of the things that really hit me in the spring last year, when our spring season was in kind of full gear, and I was playing okay, but not great, and not traveling as much as I wanted to, and not performing to the level that I know that I could have been performing at. And um, just frustration, anger, all those emotions boiled over, right? And there comes that point where it's that breaking point, that rock bottom, like you have to go through it. You have to get there at some point. But the question becomes like, if this is all that I'm supposed to be doing, and they're like, if this is the person that I've thought I was and I'm failing, what am I doing then? Right. And that's when all your identity is put in something other than, for me, God. Like, why would, like, that's bound to fail eventually. And because life has to go on, life has to keep moving. And the only thing that I found that's stable for me is the Bible, Jesus Christ, and kind of God's purpose for me. But I mean, identity is, it's an active choice every day. There's non-negotiables in your life. And those are the things that you cling to, that you know and believe are true every single day, regardless if you win the biggest event possible or if you come in dead last. Like, you are still this person and you have evidence to back that up and you have belief in yourself. So I think identity is one of those rare things that transcends all of life, because how you see yourself will always dictate how you carry yourself. Like, what you believe about yourself will dictate the values that you have, and the values will dictate the decisions that you make, and the decisions dictate where you end up in life. And when you take that train all the way back, it always leads back to identity.
Yeah. I'm curious if you've experienced any, I guess, kind of pressure from maybe people in your life, people in the community, people that just know you as an athlete. Have you ever felt any kind of pressure to be like just this athlete and not recognize other pieces of yourself, or has that been an experience at all?
At times, I would say, if the most amount of pressure that I've ever felt has been placed on me by myself. No one will ever, I think it's a common trait that a lot of athletes kind of can relate to. Like, no one will ever like have higher expectations or see themselves or be harder on themselves than I am on myself. And with that comes a lot of self pressure, is the best way to put it. Um, so I've been super blessed to have a great family and support system. They've always been my rocks, my foundation, have held me to a higher sense of identity, even when I wanted to go lower, but they've kept me to the image that I know that I am as well, which is essential when we go back to our community piece as well. But there is some kind of unspoken pressure when you get into, let's say, Division 1 sports, Division 1 athletics, or even professionally high level performance situations. There is pressure to compete, to put it bluntly, because if you don't, you your spot's going to get filled, like to put it bluntly. And there's no way around that. I don't think that it's a good idea to shy away from that, because you do get the best out of yourselves when you face that instead of run from it. But there is always that doubt, and there is always that unspoken pressure. And when things aren't going great mentally and in a mental health space, that it adds a lot of emotions to it. But to kind of go back to your question, I don't think that there's been any added pressure from anything other than myself.
Yeah, I think sometimes we perceive pressure. Like I know for me, like I was like, oh, my community, like they just want me to keep playing, and like that was just they were always there to support me in high school, and so now like having to step away from athletics, like I'm like, oh, you know, this is tough. But I think if I were to talk to those people, like a lot of that would have just been me placing that on myself. Like you said, like typically I think we do that to ourselves and maybe sometimes perceive it as like other people see me this way. But yeah, I think that's a good point that a lot of times it's just yourself kind of putting yourself in that box almost of like, well, no, this is how people see me or who I'm supposed to be, even if other people may not necessarily be thinking about that of, who you are. Um,
Yeah, it's tough, especially for athletes. Like, when you get to like these high level sports like we've talked about, and any type of sport that you travel for per se, a lot of people grow up like being the man or being the woman. Like, you grow up like you're the hot stuff of the town, right? You're the best basketball player, you're the best golfer, you're the best soccer player. Like, everyone knows you as the man or the woman. And then you go off to college, and then every single person on your team is the man or the woman from their local town also. And you go from being the best on your team always to having 20 other people who are the best on their teams as well. And you really find out, first off, who's made for it and who's not, but then the pressure that comes with that, because you have to go back home to these people who still think of you as the man or woman. You're the hot stuff of the town, but you didn't play it all last season because it's super competitive and it's tough. A lot of the times too, you have to take into account experience and age. I mean, just physically, an 18-year-old basketball player probably isn't going to be cut like a 22-year-old basketball player. Like, there's a lot of physical maturity that comes with that as well. And there's so many factors that a lot of outside influences might not necessarily see and understand, which can add to that pressure. Um, so to build off your comment there, there is added pressure, but mostly from self.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious to know kind of how you have developed some sense of like a well-rounded identity. Like obviously you've got these leadership opportunities which are, you know, you're still involved as an athlete, but you're able to kind of bring a different perspective stepping outside of it. But what are some other ways that you've personally, through your time as an athlete, developed that sense of identity outside of just being, a Division 1 golfer?
Yeah, I think for me, sports is almost like a microcosm of life, and the values that, in my case, golf has instilled in me, um, patience, dedication, hard work, honesty, um, they're all life values, right? So those really help create that or shape that sense of identity because I'm always working on myself, even though I'm working on my golf game and along those lines. And it always translates over to the bigger picture. I think a really unique way that I might necessarily have kind of shaped my identity in is social media and being vulnerable about my story and my experiences and talking about it in a space that is at times scary, right? To put it bluntly, like there's not a lot of people who talk about mental health who dive into personal experiences and who are very authentic through their Instagram or any type of social media following. And I do my best to do that. And once you take that first leap of faith and step out and show who you are, where you're going, kind of what has shaped you, I think it becomes a lot easier to live it. And it is a way to hold you accountable. Um, and then finding ways to talk, finding ways to talk about it, finding ways to give back to community, to fellow student athletes, to my team. For me, I have two younger brothers, so talking to them, keeping my family close. Um, those are all ways that I constantly shape my identity. I constantly prove to myself that I am the person who I believe myself to be, but most importantly, who God has already told me to be. And that's a huge part in me and staying rooted in my faith.
Yeah, no, I love that you talk about what it looks like to develop that, like, as still a student athlete. Like, I know, for me, like my time as a student athlete, specifically in college, was cut short because of an injury, but I hadn't been putting in the work prior to that. And so when all of a sudden I was faced with like this, identity crisis of I don't know who I am, there I hadn't been doing the work. So then it was, extra hard to
Mm-hmm.
get to the point where I understood who I was. But I think it's so valuable that you're like still in the middle of your time as an athlete, but building on those things so that when the time comes, whenever that is, because most of the time we don't know. It could be an injury that ends your career. It could just be eligibility running out. Like you never know, but ultimately it's going to end at some point. And so I think it's awesome that you're developing that before it becomes like a problem, like working on the things before it's a major shift that you have to, or transition that you have to go through.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest problems in the college athletics landscape that I've seen is like we put everything that we have into our performance, into our experience as a student athlete. And it only lasts 4 years, 5 years, sometimes six with COVID and how it's kind of run through now, but it ends. We're not a college athlete forever, right? And you get to the point where you play your final game, you medically retire, whatever it happens, they go shoot. Like, who am I? Essentially, that identity crisis that you talked about, and um, you have to be aware of it. We have to, as an athletic department, athletic group, just an athletic body around the country, do a better job of equipping our student athletes with tools and confidence and reassurance that whatever happens in life, like your experience as a student athlete isn't only to prepare you for professional athletics, it's to prepare you for life in general. And just the skills that you learn are so transferable without even knowing it. And that's one of the things that our leadership development program really talks about. And like, we don't realize sometimes how extraordinary we are, to put it bluntly, like to the special skills that we have. Like, you manage class, traveling, sports, rehab, recovery, weights, getting sleep, getting seeing your friends on the weekend, talking to your family because most of the time you're away from home and miss it, eating right, like all of these things, we're extremely efficient without even knowing it. And that is a desirable quality for any business to look into, any type of professional landscape as well. So I really liked your point on that and just wanted to follow up.
Yeah. I want to go a little more into the piece of faith because I know like that's a big part of your identity. I had the same experience, like grew up in the church. I think it was really when I had to figure out who I was that I had to lean more into Christ. But I just want to know, like, as a man of faith, how has your relationship with Christ impacted this process of like developing your identity as a whole, like also outside of being an athlete?
Yeah, it's everything because for me, like my relationship with Christ is the foundation of my life. Like I realize that my life isn't my own; it's Christ living through me, and therefore that like I start my morning every morning with the Bible verse of the day, right? Getting grounded and rooted in. And one of the things that has been really life changing for me in recent months, to be honest, like just dedicated to every night, whether it's like on my knees, literally praying over my bed, or it could literally even be laying in bed. Just like I know I'm going to talk to God before I go to sleep. Like I'm going to start my day with Him. I'm going to end my day with Him, and that is the foundation for everything that I do. Then because I'm rooted in my purpose to begin, and then I'm fueling up again for the next day. And when you do that, you're constantly right where he needs you. And it's not the fact that you're going to be perfect all the time because that's impossible, but starting the right way. And faith is an active choice, to put it bluntly. It's an active choice that you make every single day to live differently than you did in the past. And that takes a lot of courage to kind of be vulnerable and recognize that maybe you've done some wrong in the past and you haven't been the person that you've wanted to do, but that commitment to the best version of yourself, the influence and the relationship with Christ that's way more important, the commitment part. And that's really what faith is all about for me. And there's so many things that God does invisibly that we can't even see. And that's one of the coolest things about faith in my mind. And once you kind of submit, I've been able to see God all around. Like it's clear as day how God works in my life for me. It's like one thing, everything really is connected for our greater good, right? I don't remember the exact verse off my head, but um, everything is working for the good of those who love God, right? And that is it's so true. And I really feel that a strong sense of my purpose is to be a living example of that, to be honest. And I've loved it. Like it's God's brought me into places and kept me in places that He's needed me to be. And um, yeah, it's one of the most rewarding feelings ever now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so cool too that like clearly your identity is completely in Christ. So like yes, there's all these other cool things that like make up you, but having that as like your foundation, like that's the one thing that you know is never going to be gone. Like you could have anything happen to you and you know that like that's eternal. That's not, temporary, just like all the other things that make up your identity. But yeah, just having that like grounding of knowing who you are and then also being able to like reflect that to other people is really really cool. Like, and as
Mhm.
an athlete, I think that's such a unique experience for Christians. Like that's such a cool space to be able to, even if you're not like directly sharing the gospel with someone, like just loving other people well and like reflecting, the love of Christ and like showing like what he's doing through your life is such a cool opportunity to also like serve other people. Like obviously it's a blessing for us to get to have that relationship, but then also the way others get to be impacted by it is really cool.
Absolutely.
um I want to now shift a little bit into the mental health. I know that this is an area that you're really passionate about, so to start things off, can you just tell us a little bit about your mental health journey and how you kind of got started, even thinking about some of these topics and talking about it?
Yeah. For me, I was the cookie cutter student athlete who didn't think mental health would ever apply to me. It was the topic at every beginning of the year meeting that came brought up, and my immediate thought was, that's not going to be me because I'm going to make it. I'm going to be that person, and it's not going to relate to me ever, right? So funny how that worked out, but um, yeah, mental health is it's more than just a phrase, right? It's not a at times it should be used as an umbrella term because everything can relate to mental health, but it's also not an umbrella term because each story is personally unique and personally valuable and needs to be respected as such. So my mental health journey, I guess, um, started kind of in college, I guess, with the understanding of like, or with the flawed thought that it would never be me and it would just, I would strengthen it out, I would toughen it out. This student athletes are supposed to be strong, right? Not show emotion, any of that type of thing, which is all crap. But um, I guess it really picked up for me as we've kind of talked about before last semester. And I did reach a breaking point where I needed to, I literally took a week and a half off of school, took a week and a half of golf, flew back to Arizona. Hardly anyone knew where I was, just a few close people in my circle, and my family, of course. Um, but yeah, I really needed to have some time for myself. And it was the most transformational experience of my life so far because I got so close to God and so close to the purpose that I've been living out the last 7, 8 months of my life now. And one of the most amazing parts about it is like how God uses pain into purpose. And the pain itself, like it doesn't go away, right? There's stuff that you carry with you constantly. And how we talked about the shared emotions and everything along those lines, that doesn't go away. Those thoughts will always be there and they'll always still be in the back of your head. But first off, your willingness to confront them and to change them and to overcome them grows over time. That's how you come out of it. But the pain becomes the platform for you to share your purpose. Like it doesn't go away. And if anything, God flips it on its head and uses you through it. And um, it was important for me to almost not rush it, to be honest with you. Like that's one of the toughest things as a student athlete going through a mental health crisis per se is it takes time, and there's never any time as a student athlete. Put it bluntly, there's always a tournament, there's always a practice. Life has to go on, and no one's waiting for you. That was one of the hardest things that I struggled with, and part of the reason where I had to remove myself for a little bit of time to get tapped back in. But um, mental health is something that every student athlete, every person relates to. And one of my favorite projects that's come of it, like obviously stories by student athletes has come from it, a lot of great positive connections. We as a athletic department for Mental Health Awareness Month in May, kind of the end of the school year, right? We have our end of year award ceremony. I was able to kind of briefly talk about mental health, and we gave out these green wristbands to everyone that say more than an athlete on them and have our St. Mary's School logo. And it's a phrase that everyone's familiar with, right? With LeBron James campaign and all everything along those lines. But to still see people around campus wearing them 5 months later is like one of the most rewarding things for me because I know that I had a hand in making that happen and everything needed to happen the way it did so that we would be here now. And um, that's really my mental health journey. I would say it's ongoing still, but uh, you wake up every day with the intention to kick it in the butt, and you do, and you gain momentum. That's how you build on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's cool too how like your experiences then shape what you're doing now, which I think is true for a lot of people. Like the hardest times of our lives bring us to some of the most joyful times of our lives, or figuring out, our purpose, our calling, whatever that may be. So for you to continue now giving back in a lot of ways after going through your own struggles, I think is we need more people to step up and do that with the things that they're facing and the challenges that God's given them. Like figuring out what your calling is might come from, like the darkest part of your life or like the most challenging thing you've ever faced. Like that may really shape you into who you're becoming and what you have to offer the world as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the biggest takeaway for me is authenticity, right? Living in an authentic way, and I know that we'll get into it, but um, for me, as we've talked about leadership wise, I'm very involved, and I'm super blessed and humbled to kind of be a person that people look to as a leader, as someone who might necessarily have it figured out and knows what they're doing and can be on top of it. And that was the hardest part about my mental health journey was being vulnerable and showing that like I had been living behind the mask of I have it all figured out, right? I could have been killing it in golf, which I was in our entire fall season, killing it in leadership, killing it in the classroom, right? Killing it socially, whatever. But when you close the door for bed at night and you look yourself in the mirror and you don't even recognize that person anymore, it's like, what's all that for, right? Like I don't even know and love myself at that point. And that was a huge thing for me because if I felt like if it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone, right? I'm someone who's super involved and was doing and am doing a lot of great things, but like it still kicked me in the butt. And you have to be able to use your personal experiences to bless the lives of other people and do it out of humility and do it with the purpose of benefiting someone else. So that's another aspect of my mental health journey that you touched on there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, obviously, like, even this conversation is just another chance to be vulnerable and share with people. But I think hearing someone, too, who's like in a position of leadership and has all of these things going on, like to have that vulnerability shared is encouraging to others who maybe don't feel like they can share their story. So I really appreciate that you're willing to share that. Um, I do want to talk a little bit like broadly of what are some of the unique challenges that athletes maybe face with mental health, maybe you specifically, or maybe just people that you've, you know, had experiences with and have had conversations. What are like specific unique challenges to a student athlete experience?
First off, our experience as student athlete is very performance based, and we are all not only trying to kill it and win every single game, but keep our spots in the starting rotation, in the starting lineup, on the traveling roster, whatever it may be. You're trying to keep it, you're trying to build it, you're trying to be the best person on the team, right? If you're not, then there's no real point to it. But um, because of that, there's no time to show weakness, right? There's no time to show weakness. And a huge stigma that is associated with mental health is weakness. And first off, there's nothing further from the truth. It's a huge sign of strength to be able to be vulnerable and to share those experiences. But um, it's scary. It's scary to tell your coach that I can't play right now and that I need some time. And it's scary to think what happens if I don't come out of it, and what happens if in the time that I'm taking to get myself back right, one of my teammates uses it to step in and makes an impact and claims their starting role, right? To put it bluntly, and um, that's things that come with sport. It's not always fair, and it's not always patient. Like you have to show up day in and day out. Like there are sports that play literally 4 games in 3 days and then travel like one day and then play another 4 games the next 3 days. It's wild. It's unforgiving. But time is a huge aspect of it as well. And it's something that we've talked about. There's never any time. And when you think about stuff to put yourself first, you are reminded about the things that you feel like should have been done 2 days ago. And then you have to keep putting yourself off, which is devastating in the long run, as I learned. Um, Uniquely for student athletes as well, I feel like mental health is starting to get talked about more, but is still very young, still very kind of new in how athletic departments are approaching it, what the best way to provide resources is, and things along those lines where professional help is definitely needed. Like we need therapists, sports psychology, performance-based mental help. Like those are all essential aspects to mental health. But there's also a fine line where a 20-year-old doesn't want to talk to a 45-year-old constantly about their problems, especially if they can't relate to the student athlete struggle, just to tell it as it is, right? You need someone in there with you constantly to know, to understand, to gain that level of respect from the student athlete. And it's extremely difficult because there's not many 20-year-old licensed therapists, right, who are student athletes at the same time. Like that's just not really a thing. So how are we able to support one another as fellow student athletes, provide that sense of community and belonging and a person to share important things with, while also still having the professional help available and finding time to do that. Right? That is the mental health struggle in my mind, and it's tough. There's not one answer to it. One of the really cool things that I think St. Mary's does is all of the resources that we have. Um, Most of them or they all are virtual from the athletic department alone. So you don't have to go somewhere to sign up. Like you don't have to be seen signing up for a mental health resource, which is super important. You can do it on your own time. But then also you can do it in a safe place with someone like, for me, I've been talking to a guy for months now, and I've never met him in person. But he's one of the most important people in my close circle because he holds me accountable to this person that I am now. And that's a resource that the athletic department has provided that I'm super blessed and grateful for. So finding the right way to make those resources known, having the right resources, and then it's really a lot on the student athlete doing it for themselves as well.
Yeah. Beyond that, a little bit, like, how do you see the need for student athletes like to respond to this adversity and pressure? What's kind of the approach, maybe on an individual level, that you can kind of combat that, not even just to like get through the adversity as an athlete, but also like building those skills beyond? What maybe does that look like for you, or do you see for other people maybe the approach?
First off, it takes recognition that there's a deeper need for something, like that there's a desire for help. And that can stem simply from not liking how you're living right now, like not accepting the quality of life that you're at and recognizing that you need more. So, first off, in order to kind of identify the need, you have to recognize it. Then, and no one can do that but yourself. Like that is completely on the student athlete, and that takes a lot of courage to do. From there, it's really about having resources where student athletes feel safe and supported, and they're doing it kind of on their own through them. Like I was able to, because I have been able, like, super blessed to have like these deep relationships with people in our athletic department. Like I was able to kind of go for them immediately. They put me in contact with the people that I needed, and we went from it there. But I know that's not necessarily every single person's case as well. So we have to make sure that our team captains know where the resources are, because a student athlete is far more likely to reach out to their team captain and say, where can I go for some help on something like this? And their team captain needs to know where to look. Um, Still kind of like subtly hinting, like, or subtly showing where the mental health resources are without pressing them down student athlete's throat, because there's nothing worse than being like thrown into mental health talk. Like let's just keep it real. Like no one wants to do that. It's important, but it has to be from self, right? It has to be from that desire. So student athletes are only going to keep getting faced with even more mental health problems. I mean, you see with this conference realignment, there's going to be a lot of stress and anxiety as a result from that, where team schedules are going to be a mess. But it really, it's going to take a huge effort again, and it's that commitment to the long term. It's not that, you implement this resource and then mental health is good at your school, because that's not how it works. You need to kind of understand that it takes time, and building those relationships is most important, because it's the trust that leads to the vulnerability, and the vulnerability that leads to the change, and the change is that's what really creates that new culture.
Yeah, no, and I really think it's good that you mentioned like it is a long-term pursuit. It's not just, you know, hand out these resources and everyone's going to be fine. Like it is a journey for each person individually, but also as a program, as just sports in general. I think it's like you said, it still has a long way to go. It's getting better with just people feeling comfortable talking about mental health, but obviously, like we can't just think one thing and we're done. We've got to continue to um, support athletes and grow. As we kind of wrap things up, I wanted to see if you have anything else you want to add.
No, I think that resources like this are instrumental in changing how student athletes view themselves and view mental health. And it's one of the things where I will always tell guests on my podcast, the host of podcasts that I'm blessed to be a guest on, um, thank you, because you're changing the lives of people who you don't even know. And that's what, in my opinion, the most rewarding thing you could ever do with your life. Um, but right, there's always battles that you never know are happening in other people's lives. And if you can be the blessing or the inspiration or the light that someone else needs to see, and your testimony as a witness to the light can really, really change someone's life, to put it bluntly. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm thankful for all the work that you're doing. And yeah, that's really it.
Thank you. Yeah, and same to you. I've enjoyed getting to hear your perspective, and I know just hearing from someone else who's experienced it and is now using it to impact others is just awesome. And I know that other people are really going to enjoy that. So, to finish things up, the question that everyone gets to answer on this podcast, and I know you touched on it a little bit, but um, 'for you, what does it look like to live authentically?
Such a great question. Um, for me, I can confidently say that what it looks like to live authentically is exactly how I'm living right now. And there's a lot of power that comes in those words for me on a self base, because I know that I'm going somewhere. I know the purpose behind my life, and I'm acting in alignment in that. And um, recognizing that it's from God's grace alone that I'm able to do these great things. And um, authentic life is when you portray a self image of yourself and you live up to it and you live through it, in my mind. Like, you tell people what you're going to get when you walk into the room, and you not only are that person, but you're even more. That's living authentically to me.
Thank you. I appreciate that insight, and thank you just so much for being here. I'm really grateful that we got to have this conversation. I know that whoever this is for out there is gonna be blessed by your vulnerability and just willingness to share. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We would love to hear what you found valuable in this episode. So please DM us on Instagram at Authentic Performance or leave a review. They're super, super helpful for us. We're so thankful that you're on this journey with us and want to invite you to be a part of the Authentic Performance fam. You can check out more of how we're supporting athletes at theauthenticperformance.com. Also, let us know what you want to hear on the podcast next or who you want to hear. We appreciate your feedback and want to give you the best possible resources and support. In the meantime, think about how you can live authentically. See you next time.